Very short answers of the story The Beloved Charioteer by Shashi Deshpande. How does the mother feel about her daughter's innocence? She is surprised by Aarti's innocence despite her experiences. What does the mother recall about her husband's behavior? She recalls fear, submission, and lack of emotional connection. How did the grandmother react to the mother's request? She advised her about a wife's duties bluntly. What emotion did the mother feel towards Aarti once? She felt envy hearing Aarti laugh and converse. How did Azzi feel after her husband's death? Relieved, like a child hearing the school bell. How does Aarti respond to the revelations? She stares, then retreats quickly, seeming overwhelmed. Who calls out at the story's end? A younger voice referring to the protagonist as Ajji. What does Ajji signify? It means grandmother in Hindi, indicating family relation. What memory triggered the mother's realization about her husband? Hearing Aarti and Madhav laughing in another room. What's the mother's reaction to her own emotional outpour, like an uncontrollable river during the monsoon? What did the protagonist want from her husband? She hoped he would be pleased with her. How did she feel sleeping next to him? Terrified, afraid to even get up or cough. How does the protagonist describe her feelings? Like a river in monsoon, uncontrollable. What did Aarti do after hearing the story? She left the room with a glaring look. Why did the protagonist envy her own daughter? Aarti had a closeness with Madhav she lacked. How did the protagonist's husband summon her? He would command, "Come here." How did the protagonist feel about her duties? Trapped and devoid of choice or voice. What emotion envelops the protagonist at the end? A mix of relief and anticipation upon hearing Ajji. Who described a wife's duties to the protagonist? Her husband's mother, the protagonist's mother-in-law. How did Aarti react to the revelations? She looked at the protagonist as if seeing her for the first time. What was the protagonist's feeling when her husband died? She felt free, like school being over. Who called out for Ajji at the end? Preeti did, looking for her grandmother. What relationship did Preeti have with the protagonist? Preeti is her granddaughter. How did the protagonist feel about night time? She was terrified and barely breathed. What emotion did Azzi associate with her daughter's laughter? Envy, as she felt left out. What did the protagonist's husband say post intimacy? "You can go," indicating she could leave. How did the protagonist compare her revelations? Like the uncontrolled flow of a river in monsoon. Who were talking and laughing inside the room? Aarti and Madhav, making the protagonist feel isolated. How did the protagonist view Aarti's innocence? Remarkable despite her age and experiences. Why did the protagonist avoid getting water at night? She was scared to disturb her husband. How did the protagonist feel about her marriage? Restricted, obligated to follow traditional duties. Why did the protagonist envy her own daughter? Aarti had closeness with the husband she never did. Whose approval did the protagonist long for? Her husband's, which she never received. What did Aarti do after hearing the protagonist's story? She left the room quickly, looking shocked. How did the protagonist feel about her in-laws? Oppressed, as they dictated her role as a wife. What emotion overcame the protagonist during her revelations? A surge of uncontrollable emotion like a monsoon river. How did the protagonist's husband summon her? By saying, "Come here." Who confronted the protagonist about a wife's duties? The husband's mother, her grandmother. Whose voice brought the protagonist back to the present? Preeti's, calling out for Azzi, who is addressed as Azzi in the story, the protagonist, by Preeti. What did the protagonist want from her husband? Approval and understanding, which she never got. How did the protagonist view her relationship with her husband? As an outsider, never truly understood or appreciated. Who used to dictate the protagonist's bedtime actions? Her husband. How did Aarti react to the protagonist's revelations? She looked at her as if seeing her for the first time. What was the protagonist's initial hope in her marital relationship? That her husband would one day be pleased with her. What did the protagonist envy about Aarti? Her closeness and understanding with Madhav. What emotion did the protagonist feel when her husband died? A relief similar to a school bell ringing. Who reminded the protagonist of her duties as a wife, her husband's mother? How did the protagonist feel hearing Aarti and Madhav's laughter? Isolated, like she was outside of their world. Why was the protagonist afraid in her marital bed? She feared disturbing or displeasing her husband. Thank you. Please like, subscribe and comment.